Back on the Hugh Hewitt radio program, I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter, Town Hall senior columnist and retired United States Army colonel. I want to get right into this with the congressman from Wisconsin 8, Mike Gallagher. Mike, how are you?
Colonel Schlichter, it is an honor to be with you, sir. God,
that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. I'm not going to do the Hugh Hewitt normal thing to talk about sports ball with you. This Meyer Urban guy may go to the Yankees or what. I don't care. Let's get right to the important stuff. What do you know about Iran that we don't know right now?
Well, I don't know if I know much you don't know. I can say that I have had extensive discussions at the White House in a classified setting. I do believe that the reporting on Soleimani did suggest, I think there was more than enough rationale to take him off the battlefield. And for the attacks last night, I think we should all breathe a sigh of relief that no Americans were harmed during Iran's ballistic missile attacks. If this is all there is, and the dust is still settling, if all they did was launch 15 ballistic missiles, 10 hit al-Assad, where I was deployed for 7 months, 1 hit Erbil, and 4 actually failed, and no Americans were killed, it's hard to interpret that as anything other than a massive win for Trump and his entire national security team. At a broader level, if we can take Foreign Minister Zarif's tweets at face value, which suggests that they are looking for an off-ramp and looking to avoid further escalation, this would suggest the Iranians clearly understand our red line, which is don't kill more Americans. And so I think it presents Trump with an opportunity to enhance economic pressure, but not necessarily take more military action against the Iranian regime, and thereby advance our position both within Iraq, across the region, but also with our European allies.
My speculation here on the Hugh Hewitt radio program has been throughout the day that when the president addresses the nation later this morning, he's going to do exactly what you said. He's going to take the win. I expect him to poke at the impotent and ineffectual nature of the Iranian counterstrike. This has to be in a strategic messaging sense. And you were a Marine intelligence officer, so you understand targeting, including information targeting. This was an attempt to show that the Iranians were not impotent, that they can strike back. Did they do that?
Well, the question, Kurt, I think, is whether they intentionally missed, right? And if they did intentionally miss, right, then I think it would suggest that they knew where the red line was and they did not want to cross it. And this is the most they thought they could get away with without inviting a massive retaliation, potentially within Iran itself, while still being able to save face with their own people. And that's what I think is getting lost in all of this. What the Iranian regime is scared of more than anything else on earth, even slightly more than President Trump, is their own people. According to open source Iranian reporting, Soleimani's death squads recently gunned down 1,200 of their own people. That's a Tiananmen Square moment. They shut down the internet for 10 days for fear of their own people, and it cost their economy hundreds of millions of dollars they don't have. They are in a weak position. They are in an increasingly isolated position, both domestically, but also within Iraq. And the protests in Lebanon show that regionally there is a backlash to Iran's heavy hand. So I really think this is a further expression of Iranian weakness regionally. And if we're smart enough to capitalize on it, this could be a very effective way of restoring our credible deterrent and also over the long term allowing us to reduce our force posture and focus on other areas like Indo-PACOM.
I agree with you that the strategic fulcrum in Iran is the American people. The Persian people have been wanting to be free for 40 years. They are tired of being impoverished. They are tired of being oppressed. The president is always very careful to say, we don't seek regime change. And I don't think that that's a bad thing to say. But I'll tell you, if I was calling the shots, I would be doing everything I could to empower the Iranian people to take these mullahs out of their offices and palaces and string them up.
Yeah, I think the president is right to suggest, and Pompeo has echoed this, behavior change, not regime change, right? In some sense, our primary concern is Iran's exporting of terror and what Iran's acquisition of a nuclear weapon would mean for their regional posture and their ability to sow chaos and threaten our allies in the region. So I think that is the right approach. But I would agree with you that there are a lot of things we could be doing, what George Kennan would call measures short of war, things that we were very good at doing during the Cold War, things that lie in between the poles of doing nothing, the Obama approach, or actively bribing the Iranian regime with the Obama approach, and all-out massive Bush 43-style invasion with hundreds of thousands of troops. We have a lot of instruments, informational instruments, financial instruments, covert instruments at our disposal that we should be using to drive a wedge between the evil Iranian regime and their own people. And we can do that persistently over time, and hopefully we arrive at a point where the Iranian people are able to change their own regime peacefully through the ballot box. And so I think that is the best approach over time. But it is, however, a patient, long-term approach.
Well, Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin 8, I think a huge proportion of Americans agree with what you're saying here. But I think some of your colleagues, especially those across the aisle in the Congress, do not. What do you make of so many Democrat politicians seeming to take the side of America's enemies? And I mean, we've seen the name traitor, treason, all this thrown around promiscuously for the last 3 years. It's been very, very silly. But you look at some of the statements that the Democrats have made, and it's let's just say it's troubling in its support for America's enemies.
Well, look at Bernie Sanders went on CNN and he suggested that killing Soleimani was the same as Vladimir Putin assassinating political dissidents. I mean, that is absolutely insane. That is morally unconscionable. There is absolutely no equivalence between those two things. Elizabeth Warren went on Meet the Press on Sunday, and she suggested that this was all part of a massive wag the dog strategy, where Trump was trying to distract from the threat of impeachment or the impeachment trial in the Senate by starting a war in the Middle East, when we know that Trump's most consistent instinct is that he does not want another war in the Middle East. And indeed what happened is he exercised incredible restraint. In many ways, I criticize the administration for not responding more forcefully when they shot down our drone or they attacked the Saudi uptake facility. But finally, the president had enough. They crossed our red line, and he came back very strongly and took their most important player off the battlefield. So what's going on here, Kurt? I don't know. I just feel like they've gotten to a point where they simply cannot give the president credit for anything and are unwilling to admit that he did something good by taking out the world's top terrorist mastermind.
Well, Chief Sitting Bolshevik has been an endless fountain of hilarious and ridiculous statements. The idea that the American people care about impeachment may be the most ridiculous thing she's claimed since her last DNA test. Let me give you a little example. I sometimes hang out with normal people who aren't on Twitter, people who aren't political all the time. Let me give you the exact, precise number of times I've heard the word impeachment in the last 3 months outside of social media, outside of my political work. That number is 0. What are you hearing from your constituents back in Wisconsin 8 about impeachment?
0. I was just back in the district for 2 weeks over the holidays, and you get a sense of what's on people's mind when you're out and about. I mean, certainly during the healthcare vote, that was there was a lot of concern, and tax reform, things like that. I heard absolutely nothing about it, even from some of my friends that are on the left. So I just think the polls also show that, particularly in Wisconsin, impeachment is losing support. And furthermore, Nancy Pelosi's posture over Christmas break totally undermined the argument for impeachment. In other words, we were told we had to rush. We could not wait for the courts to adjudicate whether key witnesses had to testify during the House inquiry. But because Trump was too big of a threat and he had to be removed from office, yesterday. Well, now by holding the articles of impeachment and not sending them over to the Senate, she has completely destroyed her own argument. And so this is a political loser for the Democrats. And I think most people in Wisconsin just want us to focus on doing our job. And part of that job is keeping the country safe. And I absolutely believe that as a result of killing Soleimani and restoring a credible deterrent in Iran, the president has taken enormous strides to keep the country safer.
Do you believe that Nancy Pelosi's embrace of the political loser that is impeachment and the Democrats' rejection of basic American muscular foreign policy, in the sense that we killed a guy who killed hundreds of Americans, what do you think our chances are of taking back the House in November?
Well, prior to some of the recent developments in the House, I would not have been optimistic that we could take it back. But I do think impeachment has put all of those districts that Trump won, but that Democrats won in 2018, with candidates that were touting in many cases their national security experience. I think it's put them in play. And I think of all of those so-called moderate Democrats with so-called national security experience rally around the Bernie position of condemning Trump for this and mourning the loss of Qasem Soleimani, the world's top terrorist mastermind. I think that further puts them in a difficult position and puts the House in play.
Mike Gallagher, Wisconsin 8. We've got about 30 seconds. Where can people go to help you stick around in Congress and keep fighting for America?
Mike for Wisconsin, but people should all go to Lambeau on Sunday and root for the Packers and help them win a Super Bowl. That's more important than my political future.
I don't know what language you're speaking right now, Mike Gallagher. Thanks for coming on the Hugh Hewitt radio program. I'm guest host Kurt Schlichter. We're going to be right back.